Into the Labyrinth, Chapter 4, Archetypal Attractions. I've been wandering through the story of the Labyrinth for a long time, to the point where I can't tell if I'm trapped in here or I just don't want to leave. As I've shared the story with other people, it's been interesting to see how they relate to different characters, whether it's the hero, the monster, the persecuted genius, the reckless young son. There's a principle in depth psychology that when it comes to a personal dream or a collective imaginal story, like a myth or fairy tale, even if you relate to one particular character, you are really all of the characters. Each figure represents an aspect of your inner self that you may or may not be aware of. If someone identifies more strongly with one character or another during different times of their life, it may not be so much that someone is a certain type of person, but more of an indication of what specific part of themselves they are expressing the most at that time, and conversely, what parts of themselves they are repressing. For me personally, it seems like I oscillate through relating to pretty much every character in this story who's not the hero. A lot of days I feel like the monster, that at the center of my inner labyrinth hides a wretched and ravenous creature. There have also been times where I felt like another part of my psyche was Minos, the cruel tyrant who exiles the inner monster and demands obedience. Sometimes I feel like the cursed queen or the abandoned princess. Sometimes I, too, feel like the wooden cow. In recent years, probably because a lot of my work as a teacher, scholar, or writer is intellectual and intangible, I've noticed that in my quote-unquote real life, the people feel the most attracted to in a romantic sense are usually some kind of Daedalus figure. Now, it's obvious to me that I'm the complete opposite of this character, ostensibly, at least in terms of physical skills. I cannot figure out how to fix anything. If something breaks in my apartment, I'm clueless. My usual strategy is to see how long I can just make do with it being broken because I'm too embarrassed to call the landlord. If anything goes wrong with my car, and I don't have a roommate or a friend or a father to call for help, I'm on hold with AAA, telling myself this is the reason I renew my membership every year. The only thing that confuses me more than a car is a computer. And the only time I have cried more than death, breakups, or reading a sad novel was when I had to assemble an IKEA dresser by myself. It was 4 hours of nonstop cursing and crying. Now, while I'm speaking as a straight woman attracted to men, I'm not trying to say that the characteristics of Daedalus the craftsman are exclusively in men, or that any qualities of any characters have to be in the genders that they're in the story. On the other hand, I'll say that patriarchal history tends to reinforce certain stereotypes in relationships, and in many ways, I've bought into this myself out of laziness or convenience. There is nothing biological preventing me from learning how to do these things myself, only my own stubbornness and insecurity. And it's not just the manual dexterity that attracts me to Daedalus. It's his mix of physical skill and mental genius, combined with the ability to actually finish what he starts. I couldn't count the number of unfinished stories, essays, and other creative projects I've abandoned because of frustration or distraction. There's no question that Daedalus is ambitious and works hard. And perhaps he serves as a cautionary tale to those who value work above everything else, because we see from the story that his work both frees him and traps him. Another thing I keep coming back to about Daedalus is that he's so brilliant, and at the same time, so human. In a story with so many gods, demigods, and monsters, Daedalus may be attractive for that very reason. And at least in the version of the story most known today, he may be the only character who regrets and reflects and perhaps learns anything. I also wonder about how much of my attraction to this character comes from his role as father to Icarus. It's not just that I'm looking for this magical Mr. Fix-It lover, but it's when I'm feeling like the child in this story, when I'm flying too high or too low, when I'm too reckless or undisciplined and unmotivated. That's when I want to be more like this stable middle path flying parental figure. Given all this, it shouldn't come as a surprise that I keep falling in love with these ambitious, multi-talented Renaissance men who can figure out anything and always have several different projects going on, who always seem to be lost in their work and are sometimes so deep in their own worlds that they miss what is happening right in front of them. Now, what I'm going to say next isn't exactly an original thought. You can watch this in many dating videos or breakup advice videos, which is that the thing that you admire in another person is the thing within yourself that you need to cultivate. And me, putting this technical competency or really any kind of motor skills, all these things that I don't have that I'm attracted to in other people, when I project it outside myself onto them and keep falling for people who remind me of this character, the only thing I've done is further inculcated my own learned helplessness. I'm not going to get very far in life if I refuse to learn something as long as I can call someone else to do it for me. And then I'll just fall in love with that person in hopes they can solve all my other problems too. I don't mean this on a practical, logistical level. In a working society, one person can't be the butcher, the baker, the tax accountant, and the mechanic, fill all the roles at the same time and not need anyone else. I'm not promoting rugged individualism here. I'm also not trying to negate that people get into relationships where they complement each other in different ways. What I'm really trying to look at is what happens on a soul level when you feel there is some fundamental piece of yourself missing and you're hoping to find it in another person. And only then will you be complete. One day you'll find this perfect partner who may also be making up for the version of a perfect parent that you never had. All these ideological roles that we put on real people. So turning to another archetypal psychologist, James Hillman, in one of his early works, Revisioning Psychology, he talks about what happens when contemporary people don't have larger-than-life stories or characters or some divine beings that represent these qualities for us. So we end up putting impossible expectations on other humans. I'm not sure if I explained it very well, so I'm going to quote him here. Personifying not allowed as a metaphorical vision returns in concrete form. We seize upon people. We cling to other persons. They become invested with repressed images, so they grow in importance. They become idealized, idolized, while the psyche finds itself more fascinated, more glued and stuck to these concrete individuals than it would have been to the metaphorical persons who are at the root of the projection onto people. So one of the things I think he's saying is when we don't have gods, where saints are some larger-than-life mythical being, we fall in love with other mortals thinking they are gods. So he's talking about detaching, the mythical image or symbolic character from the real human person, detaching the fantasy from the individual. And it's only when we do that we can see a human being for who they are. I can see the various people I've fallen in love with, not as perfect parents, saviors, mythical lovers, or magical handymen. To share another quote from Revisioning Psychology. How quick others are to become angels or demons, nymphs or heroes. How we expect. How they disappoint. Of course these archetypally loaded relationships break down. We spoil our actual friendships, marriages, loves, and families by looking to people for redemption. So as I go deeper into my inner labyrinth, looking deeper and deeper into my own reflection and the cast of inner and outer characters in my life, I may recognize someone who reminds me of one of these figures. Or at least that's what they're expressing in their personality right now, probably at the expense of repressing some other things. But regardless of that person is still human. And this fantasy that I project onto them, there's something of mine in it, a piece of me that I'm putting on them. And I can take that back if I realize it. And when I flip this too, and look at it from another side, I can only speculate what fantasies people have put on me, or what archetypal roles or characters they have imagined I might play in their lives, especially in my job as a teacher. It's also realizing when I may have played into a fantasy that someone else was creating about me, even if I was doing it unconsciously, that some part of me knew and was aware, basking in the glow of being associated with some larger than life figure. But I don't want to hold that anymore. I don't want that level of responsibility for someone else's dreams and the inevitable disappointment that results. And more importantly, I would want for someone who has put a part of their inner self on me to be able to take their power back too. And I wasn't sure if I was going to tell this story. I don't have it written out, but it seems important, in the greater scope. So the dream that inspired what became this episode, or what's on its way to becoming this episode, happened about 3 years ago. And I had just made a major life change and moved from California back home to Maryland. And it had only been a couple months. And in the dream was the person in California who I had last been in love with. One of my guy friends, who, if he's not a Daedalus figure, I don't know who is. He could fix anything, rescued me in so many car-related situations, was dependable and steady and there for me, and was kinder to me probably than I deserved when I was being very difficult. So in the dream, and I missed him very much, and in the dream that I had when I came back home, I was following him through the twisting halls and in and out of rooms of this huge house that kept getting bigger and bigger, and somehow reminded me of every old house that I've ever been in my life. And, I was particularly impressed because he was wearing a shirt with a color that always looked good on him, and I complimented him on it before, and I was following him through these rooms, but he wasn't turning and looking at me. And in some way, all I could think of, even in the dream, was Daedalus. And at some point we got into what looked like a common space or a living room or a den area where a lot of people were hanging out and having, like a casual house party, nothing too loud. And, the man in the dream who I had been following, who was someone from my life and not at the same time, he turned and faced everyone, and he stood up on a coffee table, and yet it was him and not him. He was still wearing the same shirt, but he looked a little bit physically different. And he picked up a guitar from somewhere. It's a dream. A guitar appears, and he doesn't play guitar in real life. At least he hadn't taught himself that yet at the time I knew him. Maybe he watched a YouTube video and found out. But in the dream, this figure who was still wearing the burgundy colored shirt picks up the guitar and starts singing, and everyone is, transfixed by it. And the next word that, came into my mind in the dream was Orpheus. So it's been 3 years since then, and I was working on another piece of this longer narrative series, and I think I didn't plan on writing about the Labyrinth, but I could not do it. And over time, my dreams about that particular, friend of mine faded, but the Labyrinth dreams of walking through these sprawling houses or museums or administrative buildings that just keep getting bigger and bigger, those have continued. And what I take from that dream 3 years ago still is, that character was this person from my real life and wasn't. Just like I'm in the dream, I'm me, and that are not me. It's bigger than both of us. There's something represented by this, and somewhere in my underworld labyrinth, in this figure of Daedalus and Orpheus, that there's something in it telling me, one, that I have to keep walking through the labyrinth, and also that there has to be some artistic expression resulting from my time in this underworld. So there were many times when I would stop working on this project and start working on something else, but I always kept coming back to it. And so for the very reason that I keep coming back to this story, and particularly to this character Daedalus throughout my life, or he keeps coming back to me, however you want to look at it, my mythical father husband, who may also be my unexpressed alter ego, I have to ask myself, well, what is it about him? What is it that he has that I want? What is it that I need to cultivate and grow in myself? So, as I thought about this, I thought one thing I want is his ability to focus, to go into the workshop, the lab, wherever it is, and to be able to close the door and be undisturbed. To be able to close the door and remain undisturbed. And this just isn't just about physical space, but it's more about being able to close the door in my mind. Even though I fulfilled my longtime fantasy of living alone, it doesn't matter that my entire apartment could be my solitary workshop. Even when I'm by myself, I'm never alone in my mind. There's always anywhere between 10 to 100 people I'm thinking about at any given moment, whether it's family or students or coworkers or love interests or any number of these supposedly fictional characters. All of my inner rooms are crowded all the time. So, like my student who remarked that no princess ever gave him a thread, no one gave me a workshop, either physically or metaphorically. When it comes to working on this project, I had to build that space for myself by taking the time to devote to it, even when my attention was being pulled in 1,000 different directions. And I found the first step was even allowing myself to believe that I deserved this metaphorical mental and emotional workshop. I had to convince myself that I wasn't a bad person if I took time to not think about someone else or give something of myself to other people, and that it's not necessarily selfish to want space, privacy, or solitude. And I would even say that other people benefit from this too, because it's the only way I'm going to be able to help myself or anyone else in a sustainable way. So, in the 3 years since that dream, and, the 3 years since I've at least been consciously working on this project, who knows how many years before I was unconsciously working on it, I've surprised myself by what I've been able to do, to have come even this far, because I thought that, I'll back up a little bit. Reflecting on my life and rereading a lot of books from grad school and analyzing my dreams was the easy part. When it came to writing a script and figuring out how to record even just the basics, I thought I wasn't going to be able to do it on my own, that I needed some kind of magical partner, whether it was a romantic partner or, some tech expert that was going to set everything up for me and figure it out for me, some other kind of magical, mythical person who was going to help me out with all this, And on the other hand, I guess my final thought, at least for this chapter, when I think about this character Daedalus and all of the things I admire about him, as well as all his, inner demons and shadows and haunted past, the thing that gets me about the story now is it keeps perpetuating this myth of the lone, isolated genius. And in some ways, I certainly feel like that I'm in inner exile, if not outer exile, that no one can understand and appreciate my vision. But in recognizing that in myself, I've also had to make an effort to work against it. And I would have never got this far, in this whole series, much less this episode, if I hadn't been able to ask other people for help. If I hadn't had, longtime friends and new friends respond to the call when I asked. And as I move forward, I think that's part of the myth that I want to dispel now, that one person is the genius that's responsible for everything, whether it's external problems or problems in their own inner worlds. I'm not sure what else to say except thank you to all the people who've helped me.